Shrimp is the most consumed seafood in the United States. Not salmon, not tuna, shrimp. Americans eat more than 1 billion pounds of it every year. It shows up at every backyard cookout, on every holiday table, in every restaurant from Red Lobster to the most expensive steakhouse in Manhattan. It's the reliable, crowd-pleasing, affordable protein that quietly became America's seafood of choice. And on the packaging, the kind that catches your eye at the fish counter, the kind that costs a little more, the kind you feel good about buying, there are 2 words that feel like a promise: wild caught. It sounds clean, natural, honest, like a fisherman hauled it from the sea that morning and put it directly into your hands. But here's what that label is not telling you. Most shrimp marked wild caught was harvested in waters where documentation barely exists, passed through multiple countries, handled by multiple intermediaries, and by the time it reaches your grocery store, the trail of where it actually came from is nearly impossible to follow. Today, we're going inside the global shrimp supply chain, not to scare you, but because you deserve to know what you're actually buying. Let's start with the label itself, because the phrase wild caught sounds regulated, like it means something specific. In the United States, seafood is subject to country of origin labeling requirements, COOL, which means retailers are supposed to disclose where your seafood came from. For shrimp specifically, that sounds reassuring, until you read the fine print. Product of multiple countries. That phrase buried at the bottom of the label legally allows a single package of shrimp to contain product from Thailand, Vietnam, India, Indonesia, and Ecuador, all mixed together. You have no way to know which shrimp in your bag came from where, and it gets more complicated. The FDA and USDA share oversight of seafood imports, but the system is not built for fine-grained traceability at the consumer level. According to the FDA's own data, only about 1 to 2% of seafood imports are physically inspected at the border. The rest clears customs on documentation alone. That documentation, the paperwork that certifies where shrimp was caught, when and under what conditions, is supplied largely by the exporting country. In many of the world's biggest shrimp-producing nations, independent verification of those documents is minimal to non-existent. A 2021 investigation by the nonprofit organization Oceana used DNA testing on commercially sold shrimp in the United States and found that a significant percentage was mislabeled by species. Shrimp sold as one species was sometimes an entirely different one. The species substitution rate for shrimp was among the highest of any seafood category they tested. Wild caught tells you nothing about which fishery the shrimp came from, nothing about how that fishery is managed, and nothing about whether the documentation attached to it is accurate. It is a phrase designed to evoke a feeling, not communicate a fact. The largest sources of wild-caught shrimp sold in the United States are in Asia and Latin America, primarily India, Vietnam, Thailand, Indonesia, and Ecuador. Let's take Thailand as a case study, because its story is one of the most documented. Thailand has historically been one of the world's largest shrimp exporters, and for years, its fishing industry operated with what a series of investigations described as catastrophically weak oversight. In 2014 and 2015, The Guardian published a series of investigations into labor conditions on Thai fishing vessels. They documented forced labor, debt bondage, and in some cases, workers being held on boats against their will for years. Some of these vessels were operating as part of supply chains that reached directly into major U.S. grocery chains and restaurant brands. The Thai government has since pushed for reforms. The EU, which briefly threatened import restrictions, has acknowledged some progress. But the structural challenge remains: fishing vessels operating in international or loosely regulated waters, catching shrimp that then gets processed, packed, and re-exported under documentation that is generated at the point of processing, not at the point of catch. The product of multiple countries' language you see on labels often reflects exactly this: shrimp caught in one nation's waters, processed or repackaged in another, then shipped to the United States. Each transit point creates an opportunity for the documentation chain to blur. In 2022, a report by Trigmat Tracking and the Environmental Justice Foundation traced wild-caught shrimp through the South and Southeast Asian supply chain and found that a meaningful share of shrimp entering international trade could not be verified as legally caught, meaning there was no reliable documentation that it hadn't been taken from protected areas, caught under illegal conditions, or logged under falsified records. This is not an accusation that every bag of wild-caught shrimp in your grocery store came from illegal fishing. It is a documented fact that the system does not currently make that determination possible, for the retailer or for you. Here's where the story gets more complicated, because the alternative to wild-caught shrimp is farmed shrimp. And farmed shrimp comes with its own serious set of problems. The majority of shrimp sold globally is now farmed, not wild-caught. The shrimp farming industry expanded explosively throughout Southeast Asia and Latin America, starting in the 1980s and 1990s. Countries like Vietnam, India, Thailand, Ecuador, and Indonesia converted enormous areas of coastal land into aquaculture ponds. What was on much of that land before? Mangroves. Mangrove forests are one of the most ecologically valuable coastal ecosystems on Earth. They serve as nurseries for fish and crustaceans, protect coastlines from erosion and storm surge, and store carbon at rates comparable to tropical rainforests. According to a widely cited study in Nature Climate Change, the conversion of mangroves to aquaculture releases carbon stores that took decades or centuries to accumulate. An estimated 38% of global mangrove loss between 1980 and 2000 was directly attributable to shrimp farming, according to research published in scientific journals on coastal ecosystems. Some estimates put the figure even higher for specific regions like Thailand and Vietnam, and the farming conditions themselves carry their own concerns. Dense shrimp populations in pond aquaculture create disease pressure that's managed in many operations with antibiotics. The antibiotic situation in shrimp farming has been a documented concern for years. The FDA has repeatedly flagged antibiotic residues in imported shrimp shipments, including compounds not approved for use in U.S. aquaculture. Between 2010 and 2020, imported shrimp was one of the most frequently refused seafood categories at U.S. borders due to antibiotic violations, according to FDA import refusal databases. So here is the paradox. Wild-caught shrimp can mean poorly documented, potentially illegally sourced product moving through opaque supply chains. And farmed shrimp can mean product from operations that displaced critical ecosystems and rely on antibiotic use that would be illegal on American soil. Neither label tells you which version you're holding. At this point, the natural response is, just buy American shrimp, buy Gulf shrimp. Problem solved. And in principle, that's right. Wild-caught Gulf shrimp from the United States, brown shrimp, white shrimp, pink shrimp from the Gulf of Mexico and South Atlantic, comes from one of the most rigorously managed and documented commercial fisheries in the world. NOAA regulates it. The catch is tracked. Labor laws apply, but here is the economic reality. Domestic Gulf shrimp has been nearly priced out of the American market by cheap imports. In the early 2000s, imports of cheap farmed shrimp from Asia flooded U.S. markets. The price of shrimp at retail collapsed. American shrimpers who operate under strict environmental regulations, pay American wages, and run boats that must meet U.S. safety standards could not compete on price. The Southern Shrimp Alliance, a trade group representing Gulf shrimpers, has documented the collapse in detail. Between 2000 and 2010, ex-vessel prices, the price shrimpers actually receive for their catch, fell dramatically. Dozens of processing plants along the Gulf Coast closed. The domestic shrimping fleet shrank by roughly half. Today, the U.S. imports approximately 90% of the shrimp it consumes. Most of it comes from the same countries whose documentation problems and environmental records we just discussed. True domestic Gulf shrimp exists. It's available, but it typically costs 2 to 3 times more per pound than imported shrimp. And because it's not scaled for mass retail the way imports are, it's genuinely harder to find at a standard grocery store. The system was optimized for price, not for documentation, not for ecology, not for American fishermen. The seafood industry has responded to these concerns with a proliferation of certification programs. You've probably seen their logos on packaging, and they are worth understanding, not dismissing, but understanding accurately. The Marine Stewardship Council, or MSC, certifies wild-caught fisheries as sustainable. To earn MSC certification, a fishery must be assessed against three main principles: the health of the target stock, the impact on the broader ecosystem, and the effectiveness of the management system. Certified fisheries are audited on an ongoing basis. MSC-certified wild shrimp does exist. The Gulf of Mexico brown shrimp and white shrimp fisheries have held MSC certification. If you can find it, it is genuinely better documented than uncertified product. For farmed shrimp, the Aquaculture Stewardship Council, ASC, and Best Aquaculture Practices, BAP, run certification programs that evaluate environmental impact, food safety, social responsibility, and traceability. These certifications are not perfect. They have been criticized by environmental organizations for standards that some argue are too permissive and for audit processes that rely partly on self-reporting. A 2019 report by Changing Markets Foundation examined certification schemes across several seafood categories and raised concerns about the robustness of the supply chain traceability they actually guarantee. But they are meaningfully better than nothing. A package of ASC-certified shrimp from a specific farm in Ecuador is more traceable than an uncertified package labeled "product of multiple countries." The certifications are tools, not guarantees. Knowing which ones exist, what they actually assess, and what their known limitations are, that's the difference between using them effectively and being misled by a logo. Here's what the shrimp problem represents at a larger scale. The global seafood trade is one of the most complex commodity chains in existence. Fish and shellfish move through more countries, more intermediaries, and more documentation handoffs than almost any other food product. The gap between what a label says and what can be independently verified is, in many cases, a structural feature of the system, not an accident. A 2021 analysis in the journal Science Advances estimated that as much as 20% of wild-caught seafood entering international trade may be illegal, unreported, or unregulated, what the industry calls IUU fishing. The estimate varied significantly by region, but the consistent finding was that the opacity of the supply chain makes precise quantification impossible. Shrimp, specifically, is high risk for documentation problems because it's small, high volume, low unit value, and comes from regions where regulatory capacity is variable. It moves in massive quantities through complex multi-country processing chains. It is the commodity that most benefits from a system in which paperwork can be generated far from the actual point of catch. This is not a story about a single bad actor or a single bad country. It is a story about a global commodity system that was built for scale and speed, not for accountability. And that system is maintained, in part, by the confidence that a two-word label, wild caught, instills in a consumer who has 30 seconds to make a decision in the grocery store. So what do you actually do with this information? First, if buying wild shrimp is important to you, look specifically for domestic Gulf shrimp from the U.S. It will say USA as the country of origin, not multiple countries. It is significantly more expensive. It is worth it if the sourcing matters to you. Second, certifications matter more for shrimp than for almost any other seafood. For farmed shrimp, look for ASC certification and a specific country of origin, not multiple countries. Ecuador and some operations in Vietnam have farms with credible certification records. For wild shrimp, MSC certification paired with a clear single country of origin gives you the most traceability the current system allows. Third, wild caught by itself on shrimp means almost nothing from a traceability standpoint. It is a marketing term. It is not a documentation standard. Train yourself to look past it. Fourth, if you have access to a fishmonger, a seafood market, or a community-supported fishery, a CSF, the seafood equivalent of a farm share, those channels often have dramatically better documentation than standard grocery retail. You can ask exactly where the shrimp came from, and someone who knows the answer will be standing there. And fifth, accept that on a budget, at a standard grocery store, perfect traceability on shrimp may not be achievable. That is a failure of the system, not of you. But knowing that changes how you read a label and how much weight you put on a phrase that was never designed to carry it. Shrimp isn't going to hurt you. Eating it isn't reckless. But the confidence you feel when you see wild caught on the label, that feeling of making the right choice, the healthy choice, the responsible choice, that confidence is not based on a system that can actually back it up. Most of us made this purchase without knowing any of this. That's not failure. That's how commodity markets are designed to work, optimized for the confidence of the buyer, not the transparency of the supply chain. Now you know the difference. If this video changed how you'll look at the seafood counter, hit the like button. It's the single biggest thing that helps this channel reach more people. And drop a comment. Did something here genuinely surprise you? Or have you already been suspicious of seafood labels? I read every single one.